a draft science video response to Theoria, Apophasis, 10-wheeler guy, angry photographer, whatever. I think I'm going to call him Lardbutticus, TalkShitacus. Yes, that's what he is. So anyway, he's always using these just gratuitously insulting rhetoric. You know, Einstein's a fuzzy-haired idiot, and everybody's a knuckle dragger who believes this or believes that, and it's just all this just really stupid man kind of dumb insults. Argument from, I'll just make some dumb insults. If he was an artist, he would just draw ugly pictures of people and say, see, that's what they are. I mean, and from the big fat-ass glass house he's talking from, which is really kind of funny. No, funny in the, oh, it just can't get that silly. You're kidding me. Somebody who's going to claim to be mega intelligent and smarter than everybody else is resorting to, you know, a grotesquely immature tactic of argumentation. So anyway, I guess I'll speed this up. Okay.
Here's how to piss off your physics teacher, in a matter of a couple minutes. Wow, can't talk today, can I?
Okay, so he's always talking about these arguments he's always won, and he's always debated, and he has no recordings of anything. He has no evidence that he's ever confronted somebody and asked the question, how would you explain a field, to a physicist. He just does this fake axiom. I'll just create a fake narrative, a fake story about how they can't do something. Like somehow he challenged them and he won, and yet he has absolutely no evidence of this victory. None.
All you need to do is ask them, say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Physics, or Mr. Science Teacher, I have a question for you. Since everything is fields, and fields are not particles, how can science make any definitive statement about anything?
Frankly, that's just a non sequitur, but that's not even what they say, okay? They don't say everything is a field. They say there are these things we call particles that travel through a thing called a field. And the particle is made up of properties. So the photon isn't necessarily a particle. It's the property of its wavelength and the speed of light. And an electron would have the properties of its negative charge and perhaps something they call spin or some other character, which doesn't really exist. But anyway, I'll just play along. And what's happening in the field is, well, I guess I'll wait till this part to answer that.
And of course they will respond by mentioning Maxwellian field equations, and then you go,
that's not always how they're going to respond, because frankly the field, the use of fields has gone way beyond Maxwell. Maxwell's isn't even a field compared to what they've done in quantum mechanics in terms of creating fields, because now there's a field essentially for each collection of properties. And again, particles are just, it's another way of saying a collection of properties, because they don't really account for particles, because they have particles that are antiparticles, that makes sense, holes, and they have particles that have neither mass nor momentum.
Mr. Science Teacher, Mr. Professor of Physics, or especially the quantum idiots. The idiots of quantum are the most fun because you can piss them off the easiest.
Okay, you keep saying you've done that. Well, let's see you do it. Let's see you go piss them off. Let's see one of your encounters where you defeated them with your superior logic. Let's see where you won the challenge. You keep claiming you're the chess champion, yet there's no evidence that you beat anyone. I mean, it just is such false bravado or something. It's just such a lie. You're just a silly liar.
You say, excuse me.
Never happened.
Four Maxwellian field equations only describe a field as an effect over a given period of time with a certain vector. But
no, that's not all it does. I mean, what it does is it sets up a mechanism for the translation. Now, see, this is what it's really going to be about. They use a different word. They'll say something like the coupling constant. But what the fields are really for is to translate one group of properties into a different group of properties. See, the electron has certain properties, the photon has certain properties. The two aren't commutative in the sense that one's in pounds and one's in dollars, or one's in euros and one's in dollars. So it has to be converted into some kind of some kind of common quanta, and then proportionally establish that, well, look, I can give you, $2 for 1.5 euros, and then you'll have half a euro left over, and that means you're going to have to go back 4 spaces. So you're going to have to do some work, or take back some of the change in terms of momentum or some other way to preserve conservation. But the exchange that's the consequence of the exchange rate, is that you'll end up with change left over, and the change ends up being the probabilistic part. Because if you have less than 50 cents, you have to spend the change in a certain way. If you have more than 50 cents, you can spend it in another way. So I hope that's not too complicated for you, but that's what the field does. The field merely translates between the equity, the momentum, the power, the energy. It translates the energy of a photon into the energy of an electron, let's say.
A field, in and of itself, the actual noun, has never been defined by any branch of science.
So again, you say it never has been, and you're not showing us the place where field in the dictionary, or field in the syllabus, or whatever you want to call it for the physics book, where field doesn't have a definition. You haven't shown us the blank space where they just said, oh, we don't know what that is. We don't have a definition. You didn't show that.
Now, to use the word point, or line, or change, is not denotative in any way, shape, or form.
It certainly is denotative. So if you talk about the conservation of energy, and you say the field enables mechanisms of one type to communicate their energy to mechanisms of another type through a strict rules. And those are the rules of the field.
In describing what a field is. If a field were Bob, for example, every branch of modern science, and I have every book ever written on fields, okay?
So you can keep saying that, but apparently you haven't read any of them. Because I'm sure all of them have a definition of the field, and you could point to the definition of the field, and you could say, well, this is what I don't agree with, and this is what I don't agree with. But you're not doing that. You're just pretending they don't have a definition, when they do. You just don't like their definition. That's okay. You don't have to like it. You can disagree with it. But this whole argument from it doesn't exist is silly, and that's why I'm going to defend classic physics when I disagree with them. I don't think their description of reality is correct. I think they have created this fake field crap, okay, because they don't really understand quantization, and they don't understand that these fake particles they're creating is really the energy of the quanta that already exists in the universe that causes gravity and magnetism, and that those are the same forces that create the nuclear forces. It's the same force. And what they're not understanding is that as you get simpler, the particle has fewer properties. Like a photon only goes from point A to point B in a straight line at the speed of light. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't have any other property. And yes, you can shoot them at a frequency and give them another property. You can add a property to them as a group by shooting them at a frequency. But that property isn't elemental. That's a property created by a system, and it'll have an effect on systems. So when they see photons interact with electrons, they think the photon makes something happen. When no, it's the electron that made something happen. The electron's the complicated thing. The electron reacts to frequency. The photon couldn't care less.
If Bob were a field, or all fields together, we have only defined Bob, as far as science is concerned, by what Bob's effects are over a given vector.
Well, again, it doesn't have any effects. The guy who sits in his booth, okay, and you show up and say, I have $2, and I want to bang into that electron, that euro guy, and I want to give him $2 in euros. The guy sitting in the booth that's going to make the exchange isn't doing anything but exchanging. He's just permitting you to go, here's $2, and he's saying, make it into euros. He's just doing the coupling constant. He's not a force imposer. He's just a force interpreter.
For a period of time. In other words, we can only talk about Bob over a given time period, over a given vector with a certain effect. It's like, say, Bob walks.
You can only talk about anything about an effect over time. That's how everything in the whole frickin' universe works. That's how you recognize something versus nothing, is that the something is all doing effects over time. That's the only way you can be a something. You can't be a something if you're not affecting over time. So it's just kind of a nonsensical statement to say that's not a description of reality when it's as elemental and as fundamental a description of what a something is as you can get. That's what makes something a something. Something that's doing something in time.
10 feet in a southerly direction, and they had the effect of expelling 9 joules of energy. It's like, well,
but again, it won't be expelling anything that didn't go into the booth. So the $10 has to go into the booth before it can come out as euros. There's energy conservation, and fields impose the conservation translation rules.
Well, that's all well and fine as far as what Bob does, whether he jumps or runs or flies or falls, but we've never defined Bob.
And again, I would say that Bob is easily defined as just being properties that things have. And the quanta have very few properties. The electrons have more, the protons have a little more, the atoms have even more, the molecules more. So you get more and more properties, that is more and more configurations or arrangements of your space, more hexagon, octagon, zoctagon, zboctagon, whatever. So yes, it starts off with little simple thing, and little simple thing, because it comes in 2 colors, can make a whole bunch of arrangements of like bit math. Lots of, X's and O's, and you can make Encyclopedia Britannica out of X's and O's.
And every branch of modern science is exactly like this. As far as Bob is concerned, we don't know what Bob looks like. We don't know if Bob is a Bob or a...
Well, again, it doesn't matter as long as Bob does his obeys his conservation rules. As long as Bob takes energy in form photon and converts it into energy in form electron, Bob did his job. The end of Bob's job. And yes, they have a whole bunch of ferrymons and gluons and Higgs bosons and all kinds of things, okay, they give field properties to and say there's a coupling constant between each one of these fields and all that kind of stuff, but there's a exchange rate, but it all has to obey conservation in the end.
And Bobette, we don't know if it's a guy or a girl, we don't know how tall he is, we don't know anything about Bob.
Right, and your description of magnetism is even more vacant. To say hyperberloid and say, now I've completed my task of explaining attraction and repulsion, is so ludicrous. I can't even, it's beyond description as a silly thing because it's so silly. I mean, I'd have to use silly words to catch up with the silliness of the notion that you've explained anything by saying hyperberloid, because you haven't. You haven't said anything useful, descriptive. No diagram whatsoever of mechanism.
Nothing. Nothing. And this is
exactly what you provide. Nothing. Vacuous, babbly words.
Modern science is specific. This, don't take my word for it. Just look it up. Go ahead and look on Wikipedia.
Yes, go look it up, right? And if I find it and show it to you, what are you going to do? Oh, that's right. You're going to ignore it. So what's the point? I mean, if I show the word coupling constant, or I show the word, force mitigation mechanism, or some other descriptor to describe the field as being a mechanism that allows the interaction between different states of quanta, what are you going to say is in return to that definition?
Just look underneath the word field. You will find absolutely no description of the word field in itself, by itself, of itself.
So again, that's just bullshit. So fine, live on lies and nonsense. Have fun with that.
Maxwellian field equations do not define a field in and of itself, only as an effect for the vector.
Well, again, your straw man argument that everybody's only understanding of fields is based on Maxwellian equations, which again are the equations that are most particularly involve the translation of magnetism into electricity and vice versa, which is pretty much the most obvious, the easiest to visualize idea of this translation. The translation of the motion of a magnet into the movement of current in electrons in a wire. It's such an obvious translation that it makes the idea of what a field is doing kind of obvious.
Over a period of time. So, since everything is fields, and fields are not particles, just to ask the Mr. or Mrs. Science teacher, professor, any one of a number of pseudo-intellectual, knuckle-dragging, mental midgets.
So again, knuckle-dragging mental midgets. And this rhetoric serves what purpose? You're just so superior with your superior, huge argument that you've made. You don't even have a badge or something. You're not even wearing like a badge that says you've somehow earned the right to insult everybody else on Earth. I mean, you should, so you don't have any credibility for this, ivory tower, I'm superior argument, and especially in the context, like I said, of where you're coming from, which is fat-ass tattooed guy. Bald fat-ass tattooed guy. And you're going to insult how other people look. It's just really stupid.
A degree hanging on their wall with very fancy calligraphy and a little gold seal at the bottom. Says, "Excuse me, can you find a field for me?"
Yeah, we don't have that, so at least they have something. What's your credential except your bravado? Besides saying, I inherited a lot of money so I could buy every field book in history and own it, but not read it. Especially don't read the index.
But, they cannot define a field.
Okay, it didn't happen. He just keeps saying that's what happens. That's not what happens. Even me, a person who hates the whole idea of string theory and field crap, because it's really not about any of that stuff. The translation happens right between the electron and the photon. There's no field that does the work. The photon has properties, the electron has properties, the photon interacts with the electron, imposes its properties, and the electron imposes its properties on the photon. And there is no need for a field. The field is completely unnecessary. And in circumstances like magnetism and electricity, the field is really the energy that's left over from gravity that is mitigating the transfer. They're real, it's not virtual photons going through the magnet, it's actual photons. They're just not visible tons. But they do go through the magnet, they are filtered, and they arrive at a destination and cause very specific effects to the things they hit. They don't affect things they don't interact with. Kind of obviously.
For you. There's no book, nor piece of literature, nor article ever written that has ever defined a damn field. And if you want this...
So again, you just keep claiming something that just you're not proving. Go ahead and prove that.
Of your science teacher, professor. Because these people are, here's a neat word for you, hubristic. That's a fancy way.
So yes, this is the funniest part, right? So here's this asshole who thinks he's smarter than everybody else on the planet. And he's going to talk about people who have misplaced ego and are tripping over their own glorifying medals that they've awarded themselves. And he's the king of this.
They're saying they're full of themselves. They think they know stuff that it is okay not to know the answer to something. What is not okay...
Well, again, they don't need to not to know the answer, because the very reason they created the existence of the field. Like I said, the field isn't something like there's a Sasquatch over there and we both see it, and now we have to account for it. fields aren't visible, so we don't see them. So they're not something we have to account for. They're something they deliberately created because they don't want a particle universe where things have properties and those properties have to interact with each other. They do want to create your kind of universe where everything's a little woo-woo-y, a little woo-woo that goes through the woo-sphere. And, so they want the universe you're talking about, and that's what they invented the word field for, is because they wanted to create a mechanism underlying the system that's making the system happen. That's what bent space is. You don't understand that? It's exactly what you want. It's an ether.
Is to not know the answer to something, but think you do, and tell everybody else, and pretend like you do to everybody else. See, that's not good. Because when you think you know the answer to something, then you never go seeking out the answer to that something.
And again, all the fields are invisible. So all the translators are in boxes. You can't see them. They're not visible. You can't describe one because you just put your $2 in and the right number of euros come out. There's nothing to account for except that $2 goes in and euros comes out. So that's all it is a coupling constant. All it is a translator. So why would you have to account for it? Especially when they're comfortable with the idea that some mechanism makes the calculation rather than recognizing, no, the physical interactions change the money from dollars to euros. The money changes. The photon is absorbed, or the photon's readmitted at a new angle, or something real happens. There's no mitigator making it happen. The interaction makes it happen. The particles are all completely compatible with each other in terms of they are each other. They're made of each other. The electron is quanta. The proton is quanta.
Same way, like...
It's like the dollars are made out of euros. It's like underneath it all, it is quantum mechanics. It's all made of the same coin. Little tiny ones.
Modern religion and other crazy cultish beliefs. It's like, well, I'm sure, after I die, I'm going to go here and it's going to happen. It's like, well, your cute little belief system is awesome, but you are not your belief.
So you have this cute little belief system in your Platonian philosophy, your 4 or 10,000 years. Let's go back as far as we can, find the dumbest asshole on earth and say, yeah, I believe what he believes. The guy who didn't know how to invent a flushing toilet. Let's go with him. He's a real intellectual. He had the troop. I mean, it's just, and you're going to mock religion. That's what religion is just glorifying traditionally stupid ideas. Let's go find an old artifactal idea and glorify it and make a new little helmet out of it and live by it. I mean, you're just a fucking walking tribute to that stupidity. You're a monument to that dumbassness.
And if you think you know the answers to stuff, you don't go out seeking the answers to those things that you think you know the answer to. So
right, and you think you already have answers to everything, and you're completely closed-minded, and you're a fucking coward. I mean, even if somebody promises you a civil discord where they won't talk about how big and fat your ass is, you're still going to chicken out. You're a chicken. You're a weasel who hides behind rocks and throws mud. So, yeah, grow some balls and then talk about that kind of shit, chicken shit. Because you're a chicken shit. A big, fat chicken shit.
This is the most huge crack. It is bigger than a mass crack in modern physics and science, especially quantum and relativity. These people are really... They're all atomistic, they're all materialistic.
So again, this idea of materialistic is kind of unavoidable. And yes, the fact that atoms exist and that they, in a sense, the first atom was a miscalculation because, yes, the atoms were much bigger than... There was much smaller atoms, so to speak. The elemental was smaller than the fundamental. Okay, so they figured out some of these fundamental elements, electron, proton, combined, neutron. But they didn't get to the fundamental, which was the quantum bit. And now that they have sort of bent that way a little bit, they have confused the properties of the big bits, the electrons and protons, as being properties that the little bits have. And so now they're confusing, because the state of an electron is different or the state of a proton is different, they're assuming that what hit them is different. And it's not. So they're thinking pheromones or or quarks or neutrinos or some other bibbly-babbly-boo. It's a property of them that makes an electron do a certain thing rather than a property of the electron.
What I actually call it is the cult of bumping particles. So if you ever want to piss off or confuse or make someone...
I wish they were a cult of bumping particles. I wish they understood that that's all there is the quantizable particles. But obviously when they start describing vacancies in a crowd of particles, and you pull one of them out, when they call the vacancy an antiparticle, clearly they're not understanding what a particle is. And when they start talking about its momentum being its frequency, when it doesn't have a frequency unless it's in a group, is again just so fundamentally wrong.
Stutter, ask a science professor or teacher, someone in physics.
So he does this in all his videos. He just repeats the same argument 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 times. Amazingly. I mean, it's amazing that people reward this tripe, this mush, and the just by repetition. He just keeps saying how I'm smarter than everybody else, they're all knuckle draggers. I'm smarter than everybody else, they're all knuckle draggers. So if he says it 3 times, like, like Cinderella or whatever, Little Bo Peep, whoever it was, tap your heels together 3 times. There's no place like, my homie. It's just such bullshit. So just repeat it 3 times and it's true? No, it's not true, Ken. You're a coward. That's true.
To say, what is a field? And they will begin to talk like they know something. It's like, no. I want to know what a field is in itself. What is a field? A field is not a what. A field is not a thing. And since everything is field...
Well, again, what it is the mechanism that facilitates the translation of one quantity into another quantity. So it translates the past into the present, into the future, within the rules of the conservation of total energy. That's what it is.
And fields are not particles, and no branch of science has ever defined a field.
Right. The particles carry the energy is translated through the field. Right. That's their description. I don't think it's right, but it exists, and you're full of shit to imply they don't have an explanation, because they do. It's wrong, but they have one.
In itself, of itself, by itself, then I forward to you, rightfully so, intelligently so, and artfully so.
Yeah, artful is dumb knuckle-dragging bozos. That's artful.
Something that Sherlock Holmes himself would be proud of, if such a person ever existed, as opposed to him being created.
So, yeah, well, SpongeBob would like me more than he would you. He'd have me over his house a lot more than he'd have you over his house, because he doesn't like fat asses.
The mind of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, that modern science is intellectually corrupt, because these people are the most hubristic morons on Earth.
And what are you? Again, this is just such, they can't, there's probably a label for this kind of oxymoronia, where you're just so oxymoroniaca-ish that you say something so preposterous like, I'm skinny. It's like you're making a silly statement by talking, to even say the word hubris in an insulting way when you're so fucking covered in it. It's just hilarious.
And I will tell you other things, something else, lastly so, is that every branch of modern science always thinks it has the answers to stuff, and like 50, 60 years later, they were always proven wrong. Those guys didn't know.
They were always proven wrong, except that none of that's true either. The round wheel was never proven inefficient. We could go through all the things that have been discovered, like Mendel's experiments, not proven wrong. Zillions of things will never be proven wrong. It's just a silly idea in your head that somehow everything a scientist ever will discover or will ever say will somehow be overturned. It's nonsensical rubbish. It's completely bullshit. And let's say if it were true, then you would be under the same rules, idiot. And then everything you believe would be laughed at and mocked in the future. You can't see that, you stupid fuck? Even if your silly principle was a principle, it would piss on you in the end, you jackass. It would have the last laugh on you, Mr. Huber. God, you're so fucking dumb.
Shit. Every time. Oh.
No, not every time. Not even close to every time. 90% of the stuff we do works. The nuclear bombs blow up pretty effectively. Not too many clunkers that I've heard of. What are you talking about, shithead? What, they're going to prove you can't make a nuclear bomb tomorrow? Are they going to do that? You think 500 years from now they're going to prove that nuclear energy was impossible? No, they're not, you dumbass. You want to bet on it? You want to bet the fucking whatever buried money in the yard that you live on? You know, fuck.
All the way back to the ancient Greeks, and this is the Academy of Sciences. We know what's going on. It's like, no, you don't. 100 years later, 50 years, always proven wrong.
Always. See, you keep saying it. Always proven wrong. No. Not even close to the truth. A preposterous misstatement on your part. I mean, just grotesquely stupid. I mean, just fuck. You think they're going to prove the combustion engine is not physically possible? No, they're not going to do that.
And today is no different.
Frisbees can't fly. Bumblebees are fairies. I mean, what do you think's going to happen? They were really robots from another planet. Because it was physically impossible for them to fly. You think that's going to be the... Huh?
The people that actually got closer to finding a field were ancient Greek Neoplatonists and modern scientists.
There we go. So they understood a field. The thing he says doesn't exist in his bad theory. Now he says, no, it's my definition of a field is the cool one. Because it's 6,000 years old and... You know, we know that all the really cool things are defined properly 6,000 years ago. I mean, they didn't even have close to even a tiny bit of the, you know, just even little sanitary things like washing your hands and shit they hadn't even figured out yet, bozo. They didn't know what a microbe was, for fuck's sake.
You actually have to go back to 2,000-year-old literature to find a more accurate definition of a field. Modern science has never...
And their accurate definition is... the magicalness. That's their definition. Woo. I don't have a definition. Show me their definition. Fuck.
Ever defined a field, nor even tried to define a field. To describe Bob only by what he does as an effect over a given period of time is not to describe or define Bob.
Yes, it is. That's exactly how you describe anything in the world, as you describe what its effects are over time. That's exactly how you describe a something, is to describe what it does to the world, how it affects it over time. That's exactly how you describe a something. Yes, that's the way you do it.
Bob being a field, or fields, okay? You like this video? Drop me back your tell me jump off a cliff.
Yes, give him some more money to buy more $15,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 cameras that don't actually take pictures, you know, with the women's clothes being transparent or something. I mean, for $15,000, yeah, I want, you know, every picture to be a nude automatically. What the fuck? You people are crazy.
This is how you will confuse and piss off your science or physics or quantum.
So again, more talk as if he's been there and done that when he hasn't been there and he hasn't done that. And he's got no evidence that he's won a single argument in his life. He hasn't shown us one argument he ever was involved in where he won. on the subject of physics. Not one.
Particle theorist idiot profusely because they will not have the answer to it. They have no.
Says you, just out of your ass. Like you said, all scientific theories are doomed to be proven inaccurate.
No answer to this. And it's okay not to know, but they think they know. And that...
Again, they don't have any obligation not to know. They do have a theory. I say their theory is rubbish. It's mush. It's garbage. But they do have one, so don't pretend it doesn't exist. And they've molded it to fit some of the evidence that they've also bent and twisted to fit their theory. But I'm just saying, it's to claim it doesn't exist is silly. And it's not a proper argument. If you want to argue you're right and they're wrong, you first have to describe what you're talking about in some sort of comprehensible language and show us the pictures or show us how it works or show us how it creates repulsion and attraction. Or you have to show evidence of how what they're saying is wrong. You can't just say they're wrong. You have to demonstrate that they're wrong. Fuck.
Is the problem. That means they're full of themselves. Thank you.
Yes, that's what you're full of. You're full of shit, all right. I don't know whether it's yourself, but you're full of somebody. I mean, maybe you ate a lot of, hookers or something. I don't know what you've eaten, but yeah, you certainly are full of something. And it's probably shitty by now.
Thank you for watching. Bye.
Anyway. Alright. This has to be done now and then because nobody does it. So if no one else is going to do it, the fact-checking the lying tub of lard, then I'm going to do it because this guy is getting free license to talk his shit and he puts up nothing. I mean, it's disgraceful. Fuck. Alright, so anyway. Back to the regular scheduled arguing with assholes. Yeah, that's all there are. Whole planet is just covered with assholes. There seems to be like 2 of them on every person. Yeah, except for me. I guess I feel lucky. I guess I do.